But I'm on now, and the know-it-alls are not, and I'm not a know-it-all. And even though I seem like one. The name of the show is Fed Pride, and the reason it's called Fed Pride is because it's fine. Yeah, thanks. There we go. Is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. And even though this is on live, it's being adjusted, which is fine. And running off all the people that are calling for the know-it-alls. And I'm very sorry to hear that apparently they've been canceled according to their own discussion. And the reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and I'm proud of it. And nothing I'm about to say has been approved by my agency or any other agency of the federal government. And even I don't know what I'm going to say, so it hasn't been cleared with anybody. I'm going to talk about a couple things today, and I'm going to have to change the atmosphere and change the approach from the previous show and just talk about what I want to talk about because it's my show and I'm allowed to do that. Basically, there's an article in the paper today that is interested to me and probably not to most other people and possibly to some federal workers, and it's on government contracting out. And for the first time in history, government contracting out actually is eating up a larger portion of the budget than the actual cost of the federal workers themselves. Federal worker compensation is $103 billion in salary and expenses, and that includes retirement and all the other things that go into supporting federal workforce. And contracting out is now up to $114 billion, and there's a big question about whether contracting out is actually really saving the government any money at all. And I don't think it really is. Basically, they're taking a lot of federal jobs and they're privatizing it, which means that they're giving it over to private companies. And of course, private companies can pay their employees as little as they want to. They can provide as few benefits as they wish to, as the government will allow. And they can also pay their executives as much as they wish, and that all goes into the G&A pool. Now, the government doesn't pay no matter how much. I mean, a company can't go in there and just offer $15 million and just tack it onto what we call a G&A rate. If the compensation is more than, I believe, $1 million, I'm not sure exactly what the amount is, it could be only $500,000, then it's, quote, disallowed. It's taken out of profit or fee instead of being taken directly out of the government cost. But a lot of these contracting out contracts are cost-type contracts, which means that they can run up as much cost as they want. The government will pay all of the cost plus a fixed fee. And that fixed fee is whatever's negotiated at the beginning. The other way of doing government contracts is called firm fixed price or just fixed price, as there's various fee methodologies that they use. And if it's firm fixed price, basically it's just like buying a doll over at Kmart. You know, you buy a doll, it costs $1, and that's how much the company gets. If it cost them $1.05 to make it, they lost a nickel. If it cost them 90 cents to make it, they made 10 cents. And everything is estimated and then negotiated, and then a fixed price amount is come up, unless there's what they call adequate competition. If there's adequate competition, then they can put together however much money they want, and the lower bidder that's responsive and responsible is going to get the contract. But the real question is, and the question that we have over there is, are they really saving any money by going in there and taking all these federal jobs and giving them over to private companies? And who knows, maybe we should all quit and start our own company, because we might double, triple, quadruple, 100 times our present salaries. Because basically a federal worker does what he's supposed to do, and he doesn't get paid that much for it. He doesn't get that much compensation. And that's a fact. And everybody else talks about bloated bureaucrats, and they talk about this and that and the other. But the fact is that federal workers aren't particularly high paid. Most of them are in the middle class, and a lot of them are not. A lot of them are below middle class. And it tops out at the congressman's salary around $135,000. So no federal worker, even though he's commanding an army of bureaucrats or even an army the size of General Motors, he doesn't get paid any more than a congressman, because there's a ceiling on government compensation. And of course, there's a government retirement, and now that's not as generous as it used to be. There is the equivalent of a Keogh plan called a TSP account, and that also is some increased compensation. That's tax deferred. But there's a lot of 401k programs out there that are also tax deferred in private industry. There's a pretty good health benefits program. And I admit, a lot of private industry doesn't offer very good health benefits anymore, and that's become a real serious problem in our country as a whole. So there's a big question about whether that's going to work out and whether the government's really making any money out of it, because we now have, we actually have 3 candidates in the race right now, but there's only 2. We pretty much know who's going to get the Republican nomination. There's a big primary going on tomorrow in some Midwestern states, Illinois, Michigan, and some others. And if Dole does as well as expected, he's going to be a hair's breadth from actually having the number of delegates he needs to assure himself the Republican nomination. And then, of course, Clinton has the Democratic nomination clinched. He has no opposition at all, or at least serious opposition. So he's doing just fine. So we have 2 moderates that are going to battle it out in November. And Clinton, right now, his ratings are pretty high. He's up to 53%. It's about as high as he's ever been. He's ahead of Dole, 10, 15%. But that's very, very typical at this point in the race, where the incumbent is way ahead of the challenger. Usually the challenger goes up and up and up as bad things get said about the incumbent, and then the incumbent starts coming back. And that's the pattern that we have in presidential elections. So we'll see whether that pattern continues. And there are things that could really blow Clinton right out of the water. We could have a disaster in Bosnia. We could have a disaster internally. We could have another terrorist attack, like at the federal building in Oklahoma City. All different kinds of things. The Whitewater thing could come up. They could find a smoking gun, and that could be a big problem for Clinton. But right now, even though he's being investigated, and the governor of Arkansas is being tried right now for fraud, it doesn't look like they're really finding anything that connects it directly to Clinton. And there's been a lot of attempts to try to get the government Senate Whitewater Committee extended, and the Democrats have filibustered it, and the Republicans need 60 votes to break that filibuster. It's called cloture, and they haven't gotten it. So that's probably coming to an end, although they could investigate Whitewater through other sources. But what have they found? I mean, they provoked a constitutional crisis for all intents and purposes, try to get these notes that from Clinton's lawyer, Mr. Kennedy, and they implied that secret information or information that was privileged and referrals from the Justice Department were being handed over to a private lawyer, and they got the notes, and there was really nothing to it. And they tried to make a big deal about one phrase in their vacuum, and they vacuumed the files, and it didn't get anywhere. So we'll see. Clinton could come into a lot of trouble. They could find a smoking gun. They could find out that he pressured somebody into giving his friend a sweetheart loan on a bad piece of property. It's pretty similar to the kind of thing that's happened in Arizona with our governor. And on the other hand, nothing can come of it. And they're kind of running out of time on that issue. So we come to another issue that I really wanted to talk about. Last week I wasn't here, and neither was I here the week before. 2 weeks ago, I talked about the middle class being squeezed and squeezed down. And at that time, let's face it, Buchanan was a big threat. Everybody was talking about economic insecurity and downsizing. And now it's actually a pretty good time to talk about that, because now that the luster is off the rose and the media has gone on to other things, and now they're talking about the vice president and everything else, maybe it's a good time to talk about why people are upset, and are they really upset? And I personally believe that even though they are not voting for Buchanan, that people are upset. That in 1992 they were upset, and that's why they kicked out Bush. And in 1994 they were upset, and that's why they voted in a Republican Congress. They didn't really want to give Clinton a mandate. They didn't really want to give the Republicans a mandate for the contract with America. What they really wanted to do was to find somebody who has an answer. And an answer to what? An answer to the declining income of American males. And as I pointed out, there was a study done, and it's in the statistical abstract. I don't have it in front of me for one reason or another, that in the 1970s, 36% of the people were making of the males in America, and this is all races, were making between $25,000 and $50,000 a year in 1993 dollars. And now only 28%, a little over 28% are in that range. Now, a third of those people went up, but 2/3 of those people went down. And 2/3 of that 2/3, so about half of the people that moved out of that middle class group, went all the way down below 15,000. And it's pretty hard to make a living below $15,000. I'm sure a lot of people out there understand that. And there's a lot of federal workers. There's a lot of stay-in schools. There's a lot of secretaries. There's a lot of GS1s and 2s and 3s out there that are making those kind of salaries. And they know it's very, very hard to make it. And the reason it's hard to make it is because rents are high. And that's not true so much in Tucson, although it is somewhat true here. But once you get to major urban areas, and you go into LA and you go into New York, people just can't make it on minimum wage or above minimum wage salaries. Even two people can't make it if they're they're at the bottom of the pay scale. And people are moving out of good paying jobs and are moving into lousy paying jobs. And even if it is only 4% out of the 35%, 36% that were in that middle class group in the 1970s, that's still 12% of that group. And that's enough to upset and make insecure the people that are still remaining in that group. And that is, I believe, has a lot to do with why people are upset. Now, where are these layoffs coming from? And are the layoffs serious? Now, a lot of economists are saying there really isn't a layoff crisis. Some companies are increasing their personnel, and unemployment is definitely going down, and other companies are decreasing their personnel. But when you have a situation where they come up with a report and they say, as happened a couple of weeks ago, that unemployment has dropped from 5.8% to 5.5%, and that creates a panic on Wall Street, and the stock market drops 175 points in a day, there's a problem here. And there's a perception problem here. And Wall Street has got to realize, and the CEOs have got to realize that people are getting pissed off. And they really don't want to put up with it anymore. But they don't know what it is, really, that they don't want to put up with. So the Buchananites come forward and they say the problem with America is immigration, and the problem with America is trade, and the Japanese and the Chinese blocking us out, and we should have protection and walls and so on and so forth. And some people are saying, oh yeah, maybe. And other people like Forbes is coming out and saying the problem with the country is that there's too much taxes. We got to have a flat tax. And even though that helps the rich, that's going to help everybody else too. And I personally don't necessarily believe that, but there are a lot of people that buy that argument. That argument worked very well in the 1980s, and it did expand the economy until the debt that was created from it started causing a problem, and the national debt began to skyrocket. So I don't know, maybe that's the solution too. But people are coming forward, and they're going to keep coming forward with solution after solution. And now we have two pragmatists right there in the middle, and two people, Clinton and Dole, who really don't have any answers, and really they're just looking to compromise and to govern. You know, they're people that have been in government for many, many years. And Dole's the kind of guy who says, you know, let's get together, let's make a deal, let's balance the budget, let's do what we have to do. Let's not shut down the government. Let's make it work. And then you got Clinton in there. Clinton, he has a few ideas, but what kind of ideas does he really have? They're ideas that really don't cost a lot, but really don't affect a lot either. Let's cut welfare, make people work after 2 years. Portable health insurance. He had a big idea on health insurance, and I'm not sure it was the right idea, but that idea failed. And the rest of his ideas are kind of little ideas. They're invest in some infrastructure. Let's keep on putting money into education, a little group and a little agency called AmeriCorps, so that people can go to work and do some public service and get some college money for it. But really nothing that's going to step in there and is going to turn everything around and all of a sudden make people feel secure and make people know that next year they're going to be making more than this year, and that their children are going to be more successful than they are and not less successful. Their children are going to be able to afford homes that are better than the homes that their parents are in, when in fact now the children are moving in with their parents, and people are beginning to feel somewhat insecure. And they've been feeling insecure since 1990, when that gap and that lowered median income really started having an effect. Now, they've been talking about the CPI and decreasing the CPI. The CPI is the Consumer Price Index, and that's the main way that the federal government and federal programs like Social Security and Medicare are ramped up in accordance with the CPI. And they've been saying, well, the CPI is just too high. The calculation is off because it has housing in it. And of course, housing is something people have to pay for. And housing is part of what's been causing people to become insecure. Actually, housing prices have come down in the expensive areas, but they're still expensive. And people can't afford to work on low salaries and pay $800 a month payments or $1,000 a month payments. And if their wife loses their job and their second income gets lost, they're out of it, because they're moving from $75,000 an hour jobs. Some of them are ending up getting less when they get downsized, and some of them are getting more. But twice as many are getting less than are getting more. And that, I think, has a lot to do with why people are getting upset. Now, I have a couple articles over here that I was going to talk about a couple weeks ago, but I wasn't here. And now I think is a good time to talk about it. And one was an article in Newsweek, and basically it says corporate killers. And it goes out there and it takes some CEOs and it really just puts it in their face. You know, they make so much, and how many people did they lay off? And how much compensation are they getting? And Wall Street was really upset, and the president of AT&T was so upset. And I was in Washington the last couple of weeks at a class, and I opened up the Washington Post, and there's this big full-page article, and the president of AT&T, who's been criticized for making, let's see how much money, $3.5 million a year, and laying off 40,000 people, and having the stock price of his company go up as a result. I mean, literally, the day of his announcement. All of a sudden, he sees himself on the cover of Newsweek, and it says he's a corporate killer, and he's a corporate hitman, and he's destroying people's lives and people's jobs, and somebody is going to be mad at him. And he comes up there, and he has a full-page ad in the New York Times, and he says, we have the best employees in the world. We want you out there to hire these downsized AT&T employees because we really care. And of course, when he was making these announcements, he didn't sound like he really cared. But it sounds like this whole process, where they're actually criticizing people for laying off massive numbers of people instead of lauding them and praising them and giving them fortunes, what could be wrong with that? I'm sure that a lot of people out there just say, gee, you know, they made it to the top. They really did it. Are going to say, oh, gee, you know, what's your problem? But the fact of the matter is that the corporate CEOs in America, and of course some of the stars and some of the basketball players and some of the football players and some of the baseball players too, are just vastly overcompensated for what they really do. And, you know, that might not be true with the basketball players because only 6 people or 10 people in the world, or, you know, the 500 people in the NBA, but only 1 or 2 can dunk a basketball like Michael Jordan. But there's lots of people out there throughout the world who can run a large corporation and do. And the people out, the corporate leaders in Hong Kong and the corporate leaders in Japan and the corporate leaders in Singapore are making 1/10 as much as these guys over here. And of course, a free market, why don't we just hire them? And as a matter of fact, some companies did. GM, for a number of years, went out there and hired a Spanish guy, Ignacio Lopez, to handle all their purchasing throughout the world. And he did a magnificent job. And he's now working for Volkswagen. He quit the American company. And everybody was just, oh my God, how could GM put a guy in charge of billions and billions of dollars of procurement who's not even American, who doesn't even make as much as we are? So he's making plenty now, I can assure you. But maybe they need a little competition at the top, since these are the guys who are talking about competition. And here's just some examples of these people. Robert Allen, CEO of AT&T, makes $3.5 million a year. Actually, it's $3,362,000. Laid off 40,000 people. Walter Shipley is the CEO of Chemical Chase Manhattan. Salaries 2.5 million people. 12,000 layoffs. Gave himself a big bonus because he took over another bank and then laid off, closed a lot of branches and laid off all the people who were overlapping. Louis Gessner, the guy who turned around IBM, and I have to admit, he raised their stock price from 60 up to 120, even though it came back down to 80 at one point, and then it went back up. Makes $2.6 million a year. He's responsible for 60,000 layoffs. And even though he has, I understand, hired some of these people back. And it just goes on and on. There's many, many, many of these top guys, and they make very, very big salaries, hundreds of times as much as the lowest paid person in their company. And what do they really do? What have they really done? Admittedly, the stock prices of major companies have gone up in the last year, and we all know that that's true. But who cares? All the stocks went up last year. And they got tremendous salaries when the stocks were going down the previous couple of years, and the earnings were going down the previous couple of years. Is there any real relationship between what these guys make and what they do when everybody else, federal worker and everybody else, is being told you will get paid for performance and you won't get an award, you won't get a performance bonus unless you perform, unless you really do something and you really accomplish something. There was a wonderful article about a study that was done by a company that was run by a guy named Crystal as to the relationship between corporate compensation of the CEOs and what these guys really produce and what comparison is there. And he did a study of a whole bunch of different companies, 484 companies, and he had a large company group that was up to $1.6 billion. And then he had a mid-sized company up to $135 million. And small companies, the mid-size was over $430 million. The small companies were up to 433. The tiny companies were up to 132. To see what the relationship was between the size of the company, the performance, and how much the CEO was getting paid. And they found out that it was like throwing darts at a board. There's really no relationship. And in his calculation, even for the largest companies, $3.6 billion and above, 76% of the CEO salary is not explained by anything. Now, I'm going to have to go off right now. My name is Reed Silverin. The name of the show is Fed Pride, and I'm going to talk more about this issue and some other issues. I have one more minute to go, so I'm going to keep up for a little bit more. And so the mid-sized companies, 81% of the CEO salary is completely unexplained. It's just tremendous amount that these people are getting, and no apparent reason for it. Small companies is even worse, goes up to 89%, and tiny companies it stays around 89%. And they have examples over here. There's a company that has a revenue of $72 million and lost $8 million. The CEO paid himself $15.5 million. And of course, if he had paid himself only $6 million, it would have made a profit. So I don't know who he's kidding or what he was trying to do. And that's true throughout. I mean, there's just case after case after case of this lack of relationship and completely outsized corporate salaries. And for what? I mean, is there really competition? Are they making their money through competition? Is that what's really driving it? And that's what's supposed to drive it throughout the world. And that is what drives the revenue of a company and the earnings of a company and the amount of sales that a company makes in private industry, but it doesn't seem to have anything to do with what the CEO makes. And their conclusion is that a lot of CEOs appoint the directors, the board of directors, and then the board of directors gives them whatever he asks for. And I think that that's really true. It's indicate that there's something out of whack as far as that's concerned. But nobody dares touch it because this is how our system is supposed to work, but it's really not. Our system is supposed to be people get paid for performance. Bill Gates is a billionaire because he really invented something new. And that's true with the guy who started Netscape. He invented something new. And because he invented something new, he's now a billionaire. And he deserves to be a billionaire. But a lot of these corporate leaders are not doing anything new. The only thing they know how to do is to lay people off and to cut costs and to try to get that stock price up because in the quarter that they're in. And there's many, many articles. And my name is Reed Silverin, and the name of the show is Fed Pride. And the reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. And thank you and goodbye.